This question seems complicated, but it's really not. Now, one thing we could do here is plug points into equations. We have a bunch of equations in the choices. We have a bunch of points in the graph, but we're going to do it an even shorter way here, not using the strategy, but just using memorization. What this question is actually asking is about the concepts of factors and x-intercepts. These are two very, very important ideas for the SAT. They come up a lot. We use them a lot in things like quadratics. Clearly here we have something that's more complicated, but it's still the same rule. If we wanted to know the x-intercepts, we would find the factors of a particular equation. And so that's what we're being presented with in the answer choices. These are factored versions of whatever this graph is. So they will tell us the x-intercepts. We can see that we have x-intercepts at 1, -2, and don't forget, at 0. And so the x-intercepts are going to produce or come from factors that look like this. The 1 would come from an x minus 1, the -2 would come from an x plus 2, and the 0 would just come from a plain old x. Now this is important. There's this kind of shifting of the signs, the negatives and positives, when we go from x-intercepts to factors. That's why we factor quadratic equations and then flip the sign when we get the x-intercepts or set them equal to 0 and solve. It's because of the way that these things are interconnected. But if we know this, then that at least gets us some answers here. We can get rid of choice A because it does not have the x as 0, the x-intercept as 0. Now all the others are basically right. Sometimes they'll flip the signs on us, but we see that there are some differences. Namely, what are these squares doing here? And this is where the other piece of the rule comes up. When we have a regular old factor, it just means that we're going to have a regular old x-intercept, and the graph is going to go through the x-axis. So in that case, it happens in two places. It happens at -2, and then it comes back up through 0. So those are very normal, standard x-intercepts. The weird one is the 1, right? Because what happens there? It hits the x-axis and then bounces back up, and that only happens when we have an even number to that factor. So that's where the squared exponent is going to be, on the 1, or on, in this case, the -1. So that means choice D is going to be our answer. X and x plus 2 produce normal x-intercepts where we just go through the x-axis and keep going. The weird bounces are going to happen when we have even exponents. So normally for our purposes that's going to be a 2, but it could also be a 4 or a 6 or something like that. So even exponent factors are going to produce bounces. Odd exponent factors are going to pass through. And so that is what this question is testing. These are memorizable facts, and you can definitely get these very quickly if you have them correctly memorized. But if not, like I said at the beginning, you could always plug points into equations here. You can choose your x-intercepts. You can choose other things like what happens when x is 2. Is it a positive or a negative number? And these will allow you to get this kind of through a longer method, but still getting the points that you need.